Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Growing Further podcast. I'm David O'Mara, and delighted to be joined today by Stephen Smith of Kitman Labs. Should I call you Stephen, Stevie, Smithy?
Anything depends on who's calling me. So yeah, no problem.
Mr. CEO.
Mr. Smith.
Just for a bit of transparency and disclosure, Stephen and I do know each other a long time. We went to school together couple of decades ago. We did our leaving cert in the summer of Saipan. Remember that, Stephen?
I do remember it.
Yeah, long time ago now. But you're now based in California and from a Thai, so I'm really interested in learning about that journey and what got you from Kildare to California. So Kitman Labs is the vehicle to do that. So what do Kitman Labs do?
Yeah, we provide an intelligence platform for the world of high performance. So I mean, what does that mean? we provide a software solution that allows high performance organizations to collect all of the random disparate data sources that they use within their environments, pull that together into one essential operating system, and then allow them to transform that into meaningful information, actionable information that helps them to find and select better talent, develop better talent, manage and optimize their talent better, keep their players healthy, keep them on the field. And we primarily work in elite and professional sports and defense.
Okay, so what are some of the names that people will have known they deal with?
We work across basically every major league globally, but we've a league-wide contract with Premier League, with Irish Rugby, English Rugby, the FA, Major League Soccer, and then we work across other leagues in the US. I'm not allowed to mention their names that play football and basketball and sports like that. We work with even teams like Bayer Leverkusen. They're one of our flagship clients who just won the Bundesliga this year and had a incredible run of form. I think being the longest unbeaten stretch in German football this year, and other like even clubs like Ipswich Town were a club that we started working with a couple of years ago, and they had new ownership group went in, and we've been working alongside them during their amazing run where they've been promoted 2 years in a row and now became a Premier League team this year, which is great, and work with other brands like Real Madrid in Spain. And so I think you can pick from the world's elite, and generally they're at this point in time they're a client, which is great.
Cool. So before we kind of talk about what problem you're solving for these clients, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. So after we did our leaving cert, what happened?
After we did our leaving cert, I went off and studied for a sports medicine degree. So I've a background in athletic training, and off the back of that, I got an internship at my final year, or placement essentially with Leinster Rugby, and started working for them for a couple of months. It was supposed to be just the collegiate placement aspect, and then at the end of that, they offered me a role for summer work to basically help them through preseason. And then at the end of that, I ended up staying there and ended up staying with them for almost 10 seasons. So my role there essentially was, whilst I had a sports medicine undergraduate, played rugby, but then also had a strength and conditioning certification that I just did in my evening times because I was pretty fascinated by, how and why, they're training athletes in different ways. And so I ended up basically being the gel between the kind of rugby department, the sports medicine department, and the strength and conditioning department. And generally, there's quite a lot of friction between those groups within a high performance environment, because the role of the sports medic is to keep the athletes healthy and, wrap them up in cotton wool, keep them healthy, keep them on the field. The role of the strength and conditioning staff is to make them bigger, faster, and stronger. So there's a lot of kind of tension between that. And then, the rugby staff to get the stimulus that they want from a tactical or technical perspective, they just want more and more and more time with the athletes on the field. So everybody's pulling in different directions, and my job essentially was to try and be a translator and be the gel between those groups. And
so you kind of fight in the corner for the athletes to be not overworked.
I'm fighting the corner for objective decision making. I think that's how I kind of felt my role was, because what was happening was people were basically just interpreting what they saw happening in certain ways without necessarily having evidence to back it up. So somebody would pick up an injury, and somebody would ask them, hey, what have you been doing over the last couple of days? And they're like, oh, I did a lot of this stuff on the field. And then all of a sudden it was the fact that they were doing this work that was the reason why they were hurt. And that's not necessarily that's not always necessarily true. Sometimes actually, when you think about what's happening in modern sport today, these games are getting like more physical. They're getting higher speed. They're becoming just much more elite games. And because of that, I think our athletes need to adapt to that as well, right? They do need to be bigger, they do need to be faster, they do need to be stronger, they do need to be fitter, and you need a certain level of stimulus in what you're doing and training every day to be capable of actually withstanding the demands of the game. So it's not always about pulling the players back and resting them and allowing them to recover. Oftentimes they just need to get through work and capacity.
I guess the more strength and conditioning has kind of developed and become a mainstay of all levels of sport, not just elite sport. People are getting bigger and stronger and faster, hitting into each other with greater velocity and that kind of thing. And are you seeing different kind of injuries now than you would have been, 18, 20 years ago when you started off at Leinster?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've learned, and this is why what we do in the company that I've built is so important, is that everything that you do in terms of these games, like whether it's rule changes or adaptations to the games and how they're played, has an impact in terms of the physical demands that are being placed on the athletes, and therefore that has knock-on effect and ramifications in terms of player health. So one of the things that we've been doing is helping teams to collect the most accurate contextual medical information from, how the injuries are happening, when they're happening, where they're happening, what was happening around them, what the athletes were doing, what they were participating in, what activities were going on, everything that you can imagine around that, to then be able to understand what is the impact. And we've seen leading organizations like the NFL, who are probably the most advanced and sophisticated from a player health and safety perspective globally. They have made probably more than 30 rule changes to their games based off information relating to player health and safety. So they're figuring out that this aspect of the game, through data being collected in platforms like ours, they're essentially figuring out, well, this aspect of the game is resulting in this type of outcome from a player health perspective. That means we may need to tweak the rules or tweak the game slightly to protect the athletes by doing X, Y, or Z. And that's been pretty fascinating. But obviously, then you make those changes, there is potential for other ramifications, etc. So it's become very scientific, so that we can learn about what's happening.
So just to stick with the American football for a moment, the thing that gets all the headlines, and it's in rugby as well, is head injuries. So is that a big part of the work that you guys do? Yeah,
the types of data we collect there certainly relate to everything around like head trauma, potential concussion. And I think it's an area that the NFL have done an incredible job in, and not just in the assessment and diagnosis, treatment, and return to play protocols around concussion, which I think they have best in class in relation to that in the NFL. But they've also been a leader in terms of understanding things like protective equipment and how that impacts things. So they have completely different, types of helmets that are being used in a game today to provide better protection, better absorption, and provide essentially less vibration when an impact occurs to stop essentially the brain from shaking inside somebody's skull. And they've also introduced in training camp, I think it was the year before last, was the first year, they introduced this thing called a Guardian cap, which if Irish people were looking at it, they would look at it and say it's a scrum cap that basically has gone on the outside of a helmet. And the impact of the Guardian camp in training camp reduced concussions by over 50%.
Wow.
And now this year, for the first time, they're actually using Guardian cap in games as well. So the Guardian cap players will be allowed to put them on and wear them in games too, and protect their heads even more from that. But then they changed some rules, like their kickoff rule has changed as well, because when you had a kickoff in NFL, what was previously happening was the ball was was being, the punter would kick it, the receiver then was taking that. And as everybody basically ran for 50 meters at that player to then spear him, and it was quite a spectacle to watch, but it was incredibly dangerous. So they've changed essentially the distance between the players to basically eliminate the amount of run up speed and time that you have for that. And they've also introduced a thing called a fair catch, which means that it's almost like a mark in rugby where you can catch it and it's a much safer environment. And that, those changes, all of those changes have meant that the amount of head impacts and concussions that are occurring in NFL has dropped enormously over the last number of years. And they're publishing all of the numbers on NFL.com/player health and safety
/Kitman. Anecdotally, you kind of hear in American football and in New Zealand the rugby that parents of young kids are kind of reluctant to have their kids playing these kind of aggressive kind of contact sports. Is that something in your experience that the the authorities are taking really seriously for the future of their game? Is that why these rule changes are coming about, or do you have any kind of insight into that?
Yeah, 100%. There isn't a league that we deal with today that doesn't take that incredibly seriously, and also don't take the role that they play and the duty of care that they have for the athletes. Not just the brand and the image side of it for like young kids and participation rates and getting people involved, but like the duty of care and the responsibility that they have to the athletes that are participating in their games and their leagues today. They take it immensely seriously. Like you have leagues that are spending millions and millions of dollars every single year to try and solve these problems and understand the games better. And I think that's quite admirable. And, you know, from my perspective, being as close to it as I am and what's going on and how people are learning from it, like I would have no issue. I have 3 boys and I would have no issue with either of them or any of them playing football or rugby.
I remember preparing for this, I was just thinking about when we were in school, there was an old coach of ours, Jim Short from your neck of the woods, and he had a quote about someone said they'd pulled a hamstring, goes, in my day a hamstring was hanging up in the butcher shop. So I mean, I think things had progressed a little bit since then, but maybe not a huge amount in relation to injury. But I'm kind of interested in that journey from, you know, you kind of coming in as an intern to Leinster to ultimately leaving to set up your own business. So I'm guessing you identified a problem in doing your job properly, which evolved into Kitman. So can you tell me how all that kind of came about?
Yeah.
Also, a secondary question, not to load too much on you, but how different was Leinster from when you joined to when you left, and how much of an appreciation was there for the work that you were doing?
Yeah. So it stemmed from, I suppose, pressure, right? Michael Cheika was the head coach at that point in time, and he's not the kind of guy to mince words.
A real shrinking violet for anyone who doesn't know their rugby.
But he's incredible. Also, in the same breath, he's incredibly charismatic and like probably one of the best leaders I've ever worked with. And you know, he felt that our players deserve better, right? So he would come in and ask questions as to like what types of injuries are occurring, how long are they lasting, you know, what's the different what different position groups are getting different types of injuries, or he would, you know, he'd want to know, well, what does the strength profile of like an academy player look like? What does it look like for a club player? What does it look like for an international? What does it look like for a British and Irish Lion? Or he would ask questions like, you know, how much better are our players getting tactically or technically, or how much stronger are they getting? How much fitter are they getting? And the reality at that point in time was we didn't really have any data. Like the electronic medical record of choice in Leinster was a whiteboard, and the injuries got rubbed off when they were treated, and that was it.
That's that problem solved.
Yeah. So we did have a lot. What we did have data in the strength and conditioning department. There was strength programs were being written in Excel. Players would fill them in. And then at the end of your program, you would put them into a ring binder, and then they went into a storage cupboard. So it was about 8 to 10 years worth of data there when I started living in a cupboard. So the first thing I did was basically started to digitize that. So build a longitudinal database to like start basically profiling that. And we started using that for benchmarks across the club and from every level throughout the club. And start setting like standards off that. And Cheika really loved that. And he loved the concept of just being able to be grounded in that and say, this is what a lion looks like. This is where you need to be. And he was really great at getting people excited about like their journey and where they could go. And then he gave me a mandate to start digitizing everything. So I learned how to write VBA code in my evening times, and then started to build out our first electronic medical record product, and then started to build out capabilities for us to collect recovery information, sleep information, biomechanical data, fitness profiling, strength profiling, even hormonal testing that we were doing as well. And then in late 2007, 2008, we started to use wearable sensors. So we found a company that was developing wearable sensors for athletes, and we started to use them on our athletes. And we assumed through all of this, now we have all this data, we'll be able to make great decisions. But what we found really quickly was that, you know, people were weaponizing it for storytelling. So you would have somebody who, like sports medicine practitioner, would look at the data and say, this person ran more than that person, he's going to be at risk of injury, he's going to be more fatigued. And then you would have the strength and conditioning team would look at it the opposite way and say, this person didn't run as much, he's not fit enough, he needs to do more. Right. And the reality was, like, most training sessions and most games are not maximal events, right? So it's not a test. You're basically, what you're getting from these systems or devices is a description of what's happening. It doesn't tell you what somebody's capacity or capability is. So my role essentially, was, writing a firing line between all of these people, kind of arguing and debating what it meant. And I kind of realized that, we need to leave our egos outside. We need to take a step back. We need to ask better questions of the data. I performed my master's thesis around the whole concept of combined risk factors as predictors of athletic injury. So we took diagnostic code from medical record and then started running pattern recognition on what we were doing with our athletes in training and games and then how they were responding. And off the back of basically what we were learning through that and decision making that was occurring from that, we reduced our injury profile by just over 30% year on year for 2 years. And that coincided with a very successful period for Leinster Rugby as well. So won our first European Cup in 2009 and then went on to win 2 more Heineken Cups and an Amlin and a couple of domestic titles as well whilst I was there. And what happened from that was, we had a lot of international teams, Premier League teams coming over to our practice facility trying to figure out what we were doing. And then some of them wanted to buy it. And that was it. That's where the concept came from. We decided to spin it out as a company at that point and start to pursue this. But even when we did that, I started the company in 2012. But then I stayed working for Leinster for 2 years. It was never my plan to leave. It was never my plan to
to have a dream job for anyone who loves rugby.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved it. And I loved working in Leinster and I loved the environment. And I had seen it change. The one thing that changed was we had way more data and information and we were able to do things in a much more sophisticated fashion. But the culture of the organization hadn't changed. That was the same from the very beginning. There was a cohort of people in that building that were incredibly passionate about success and about growth and about learning. And it had a group of people that didn't have, for the superstar players that were involved, it was a very low ego environment. And it was a group of people that just cared about winning and didn't care about whether they were good or bad on any given occasion. They cared about basically getting better. And I just loved being involved in that environment. It was really, really special. And I still have I have incredible friendships from that group that will stand to me for life. So it changed quite a lot, but it wasn't the plan to jump and to come and do something like this. But when the opportunity came up and we started to grow it out, I got to pursue my passion and the thing that I was really, really interested in. So it was too cool an opportunity not to pursue.
So tell me about that leap to being an entrepreneur. You obviously had the safety net of doing this as your side hustle, if you want to call it that, while having the comfort of a full-time job in Leinster. But then you leave Leinster, and how many people are with you at that stage? Is it just yourself or a small team around you?
Yeah, so I had maybe 4 staff at that point in time that were working in the business full time. But it was Jamie Heaslip's fault, and I continue to tell him this. But he was at the Web Summit in Dublin, and there was an investor from Silicon Valley who was over on that was speaking at the Web Summit as well. And I think the speakers were basically on this VIP track where they were being shown around to different sites and et cetera in Dublin. And one of those was the Aviva Stadium because it had just been recently reconstructed. And Jamie was the Irish rugby captain at that point in time, and he was giving the guided tour of the stadium to these speakers at the conference. And he got speaking with this guy called John Malloy, who's a very well-known investor in Silicon Valley. He's invested in a huge number of very successful companies like PayPal and Waze. He was he's generally his approach is he's first money in, he finds ideas and then helps to basically nurture and grow them. And Jamie was asking him for advice on investment and where he could put his money to work, etc. And John had asked him about innovation in sport, and he mentioned my company. And he asked if he could make an intro. So got chatting with him the next day and started to build a relationship with him over a number of months. And the following summer, then he offered us an investment of $4 million.
Wow!
But part of the terms and conditions were I needed to be in the business full time. Right? If he was going to put his money where his mouth was, I needed to put mine where mine was. So
not a part-time gig for $4 million.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So his firm made the investment. Then as part of that, I left Leinster and then I moved over here to the US. I moved to Silicon Valley at that point in time to learn. I felt if I was going to do this and it was going to be successful, I needed to immerse myself in it. And I also needed to learn, right? I knew I've never done things like this before. Running a business was not something I'd done. Certainly building a software company was not something I'd ever done before. So I wanted to be close to them, and they were offering as part of, it wasn't just the capital that they were providing. They were offering us expertise, and they'd built and grown countless companies that have been successful. And they introduced me to some of the CEOs of those companies, and they told me about the support that they got. And at that point, we just decided, hey, we're let's go and learn and see what happens. And if nothing else, it'll be a fun story.
That's amazing. That's 10 years ago now. 2014, you up sticks and moved to California.
Yeah, 10 years ago. Cool. Sometimes it feels like it's 20 years ago. Sometimes it feels like it was 9 months ago.
How many people are in the business now? How many countries?
We've about 200 staff, work with over 2,000 teams globally, and I think the product is in like 40 different languages. So we work, we work all over the globe. We've clients in Brazil, Japan, and Australia, New Zealand, even parts of Asia. I think we have people in Singapore, etc. as well. So it's been cool to see the impact that it's had, and where the parts of the world that it touches.
That's really cool. So 200 people. So managing a software business with 200 people is a very different skill set from what you trained as and your work in Leinster. So have you found that kind of transition from Leinster work to entrepreneur to managing 200 people?
Yeah, it's definitely very different. But I don't know. I love change, and I love things being different. It's my favorite thing about being an entrepreneur is that there are no 2 days the same. And I think one of the things that was, if I was to look at Leinster and say, okay, what parts of it were frustrating for me, given my personality type, was that some of it felt that there was times where I was going through certain days and I'm like, this is it was, somewhat repetitive. And I know that's part of the process, right? And it's all worth it when you get to the game and things happen, etc. It's all worth it. But I don't have that same 9 to 5. It's certainly not a 9 to 5 job where I know exactly what I'm doing from day to day. It's it evolves and shifts really, really quickly. And I approach the whole thing with a very open mind. I love to learn, and I'm fascinated by trying new things. And I also like to push myself and challenge myself. And you know me for a long time. I have the type of mindset that believes I can probably do anything, sometimes to my detriment. But I'd always be willing to give something a shot, right? And I think sometimes you just have to
if you believe you can, you're right, and if you believe you can't, you're right as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes that's one thing I try to drill into my kids now. I'm like, if you believe that you can do it, you can do it, and if you can't, what's the worst that's going to happen? You'll figure out that a better way to do it next time around, right?
America is probably the perfect place for you, because they've got that real positive attitude to drive things on and give things a crack.
Yeah, the cultural difference coming here at the start was actually quite insane, because in Ireland, I think the mindset, at least from certain people that I would have interacted with, would have been, geez, that's terribly risky. Why would you leave a full-time job? Why would you take that risk? Why would you you could be there forever to do it? But no, in the US, it's put all your chips on the table and let's go. And I kind of love that.
Cool. Talk about leadership. So you're leading 200 people now. Are you a Michael Cheika type, or are you more softly?
I'm not sure, actually. It's a very good question. But
and what would your colleagues say about you?
Yeah, I try to find very good people. I try to give them the space to do what they do best and get out of their way. I think there's some people that work with me that would hear me saying that and say yes, and then I'm sure there's people that are like, that's not necessarily true. I don't know. I think your management style just has to evolve and change, and I think sometimes it also has to be different with different people that you work with, right? I think you'll have different people respond to different things, and also different people have different needs at different points in time. So the style and the role and how engaged you are and what you do with them to support them or help them or work with them needs to evolve and change as well. So I probably I'm fluid, I would say.
So you're not always throwing football boots around the changing room like Cheika might have been.
No, I'm definitely not. I'm definitely not that. But I never saw him throw a football boot either. I've seen him do other things, but he didn't throw a football boot.
And have you kept in touch with the likes of him? He's had a pretty amazing coaching career since Leinster, but these you would have met some amazing characters in that dressing room. Who've all gone on to, a lot of them have gone on to pretty cool second, third careers. Have you kept in touch with a lot of those guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kept in touch with a lot of the players that were part of that group. I talk to all the time. But then Cheika I've kept in touch with lots, and he actually came over here to the US. And when I was living down in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, and I was living just off Stanford campus, and he was actually doing an MBA in Stanford. So we used to meet up every time he'd come into town for his classes. And then we actually got to go and watch one of my investors quite kindly gifted me tickets, NBA finals tickets, floorside NBA final tickets to go and watch the Warriors versus the Cavs a number of years ago. Because Cheika was in town and he knew the relationship between us. So we went to an NBA finals game together, which was really cool. And then I've been down to Australia for work, and he's, I've stayed with him and his wife, Stephanie. And at that point in time, he was actually Wallabies head coach, and he brought a whole pile of, the Wallabies players over for a barbecue whilst we were there as well. So I got to like interact with them in a build up to a World Cup at one point in time. So that was great. But then, yeah, I keep in touch with Joe Schmidt as well, and him and his wife are always great for remembering our kids' birthdays and Christmas cards and stuff like that. So it's really nice. Yeah, the community that Leinster in particular, I'm sure it's rugby, but my experience, obviously, the community and culture and family aspect of that is really special.
And so you're across a lot of different sports, and I think you mentioned security or defense. Yeah, defense. Okay. So do you see like big differences in the cultures of sports teams? What works well? You're in the weeds, I guess, pretty deep with a lot of these teams now. So you must come across some interesting contrasts between what works well, what doesn't.
Yeah, sports for sure. Very different cultures. Like when you go from rugby to soccer, there's extreme differences. When you go from soccer to American football, there's differences. Baseball, there's a completely different environment. Yeah, ice hockey over here in the US is probably closest to rugby in terms of like the type of style and culture, but it's all just I think it all stems from the birth of the sport and then the values that are associated around that, and it is really, really interesting to see though, and to understand like how it's how it's all pulled together and how it grows, and then to also see when new ownership comes in or new executive staff come into organizations, how that evolves and changes and shifts. So, when you go to a lower tier football club in the UK, they're generally not that sophisticated. They're generally not not wildly advanced in terms of what they do. But then you have something like what just happened at Ipswich over the last number of years, where Mark Ashton, who's the CEO that went in and assembled like a star-studded team around them. And you see the impact that like a very forward-thinking leader like that, who like relies on data, uses analytics as like a core part of everything that they do. You see the impact that it has. Like a team like that does not get relegated or does not get promoted twice in a row by accident. that is not chance. So
without having the backing of a petrostate in the Middle East.
Yeah, exactly. So without having the resources that some teams would have had to do that, it's quite amazing to see the cultural shift within organizations like that when you bring the right leader in and you give them the freedom to do the things they want to do. So I'm constantly fascinated again by seeing things like that happen and how they shift.
That's really cool. All your new clients, they come on board, are they expecting to have that Leinster Rugby experience, winning 4 or 5 trophies every year, or what? You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So what's your offering to new clients?
Yeah, I think it's part.
They want trophies, they want promotions, they want extra money. But like, what can you bring?
Sometimes not. Like sometimes some organizations realize that the resources that they have will not allow them to compete to the extent that they're going to be European champions and things like that. For some organizations we work with, their goal is talent development. It's produce enough talents or produce more talent for sale so they can generate more revenue for their business. For some teams, it's about, finishing mid-table, but being able to spend less than others and get a higher return on their investment because of the higher they place, the more TV rights and media right cash that they get. So their business, of course, everybody wants to win and wants to be successful, but most people involved in elite sport realize that there's one person picks a trophy up, right? And that the likelihood of that being everybody is zero. So, I think people are very pragmatic, and I think for most organizations, they're looking for incremental improvement in certain areas. And I think that's for what they're looking for from us. They're looking for partnership. They're looking for us to be able to come in and help them to align to their goals, right? Nobody's looking for a miracle. Everybody is looking for, here's the things that we care about. Here's the things that are not working for us. Here's what we want to improve. And our job is to come in and help them support that.
So you touched on just to look at the product or the offering that you have. So you kind of talked about, early days of Leinster, getting this big bank of data going back to injuries and digitizing that. That's obviously morphed into something much bigger. So are we talking about wearable tech? Are we talking about input devices for players? Or what does that look like? Or what's different about what Kitman provides?
Yeah, what's different is a couple of things. One is that most organizations or traditional organizations would have relied on a collection of different solutions. So their medics would live in one platform, their fitness staff would live in another platform, their coaches live in another, their operations staff live in another platform. What's unique is that we've brought all that together. And the reason that we did that was that we wanted to be able to make decisions about our athletes by understanding everything about them. We didn't want to have to go to one place and see what are they doing on the training field, and then go somewhere else and see how have they recovered, and go somewhere else and see, well, how, what's going on from a medical perspective. We wanted to be able to see, have that 360-degree view and understand what was happening. So what's unique is we've brought all of those pieces together, and that means that, from a management perspective, and this again comes back to the type of approach that someone like a Michael Check or a Joe Schmidt tried to instill was, the management of athletes is like a Knights of the Round Table approach, right? You bring all of the relevant staff together. You help them to understand what's happening. You help them to understand what their needs are, and you make trade-offs together about how you and you do that by using information. And that's exactly how we've built our product, is to support that type of mindset, that type of approach, that type of philosophy and culture.
And is there a lot of competition in your field now?
Yeah, there's some competition, but I think what we've done really well is we've been methodical about the areas that we've jumped into, and how we've grown through that. And we've also been fortunate enough, like we've raised almost $100 million for this, and so we've had a bit of a war chest in comparison to others. So most other people have tried to just go and attack one place or one area because it's too hard, right? The problem that we're solving it's pretty enormous, and the sophistication of what you need to be able to do to collect the relevant information, to integrate with all of the different products, it's a pretty mammoth task. So if you don't have the resources to do that, you have to lower your expectations and narrow your focus. And we haven't had to do that. We've been able to have a very broad aperture, and we've been able, I think in some ways the ambition that we have for that is the reason why we've been able to raise the capital and get the resources that we have to do this. And then I think we've also secured contracts with some of the biggest leagues in the world, and they're long-term agreements. So that makes it pretty hard for someone else to jump in.
Yeah, cool. And so do you have a long-term vision for the business, where you want to get to? Do you want to get involved in different industries, different client base, or what does success look like to you down the line?
Yeah, success for us is essentially just becoming more completely pervasive across high performance organizations. So, we have a really ambitious vision for what we want to do. We want intelligence to lead decision making across every aspect of high performance. And, whilst we're 10, 12 years into our journey, there's still a lot of wood to chop. So I think for us, the vision is just to keep doing what we're doing, just keep getting to fulfill the mission and vision on a daily basis, and get ourselves one step closer to what greatness looks like.
AI is kind of taking over the world. So what impact is that having on your business, or how do you see it as helping your business kind of long term? Yeah,
well, listen, we've always had, I suppose, analytical capabilities built into the system. We've always had a data science approach. My entire master's, and the premise for this was based around analytics. So AI and the role of analytics, hasn't really shifted or changed for us. I think the great thing is there's an increasing appetite for it in the market, but I think our approach to analytics as a whole, and AI being one of those subsegments within that, is that with the types of data that we're dealing with, we're talking about medical data, we're talking about players' health, we're talking about their career, we're talking about their longevity, we're talking about their potential for them to earn money and their finances. They're really serious topics. So we have to really understand the information that we're using, and we have to be really, really, really robust about knowing what does that actually mean before we're making decisions on it. Because if we decide that a player should play in a game or shouldn't play in a game, and they pick up an injury in that game, and that injury ends their career, that's their multi-million-dollar decisions. Or similarly, if we look at from a talent development perspective, we're bringing athletes through a pipeline. As you're bringing them through an academy structure, you're making decisions as to whether you keep that athlete or do you release that athlete. And if you release an athlete because of AI or because of analytics, and that athlete goes on to be the next Messi, then that's a huge problem. So these are very, very, very big.
Someone's in a lot of trouble if that's happening.
So that player shows up in another club a couple of years later, and then he gets sold in the transfer market for 150 million. Somebody is these are enormous decisions that we're making and supporting. So our belief about AI and analytics is that, we should take a measured approach to how we leverage them. We should really understand the information that we're collecting, so that we can underpin those decisions in the right format.
And finally, I just want to ask you, and I want a really profound answer to this question. We ask all of our guests, but what does innovation mean to you?
Innovation is everything to me, and innovation is everything to us as a company. Everything that we've done and the journey that we're trying to support is about innovation, and I think it's the only part of what we do that is a non-negotiable for me. It's the thing that gets me excited about what we're doing, is basically changing the landscape of the environment that we work in. And I think the day that we stop doing that is the day that we're not fit for purpose any longer.
Stevie, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing how Kitman grows over the next 10-12 years.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, great to be here today.